Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into the world of Grigory Rasputin,
Oh, Rasputin.
the so-called Mad Monk,
Right.
who both fascinated and scandalized Russia in the
Yes.
early 1900s.
Early 20th century.
We'll be using historical texts and biographies
Oh, interesting.
to try and see past all the myths and legends surrounding this guy,
Yeah.
to get to the facts about his life, his influence,
Uh-huh.
and that really controversial relationship he had with the Russian imperial family.
Well, it's interesting, so much of Rasputin's image
Yeah.
has been just completely distorted by all the rumors and
Right.
speculation over the years. But
It's crazy. Yeah.
when you actually dig into the historical record,
Uh-huh.
you start to see, like, a much more complex picture.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then.
Sure.
Most people know him as this incredibly powerful figure
Right.
with this almost mystical influence over the Tsarina.
Yeah.
But Rasputin's journey to the heart of the Russian court
Yes.
is a fascinating story in itself. So tell us a little bit about his early life. Where does he come from?
Well, he comes from very humble beginnings,
Okay.
born into a peasant family
Okay.
in a small Siberian village in 1869,
Wow.
and actually grew up illiterate.
Really?
Yeah.
So he couldn't read or write for a good chunk of his life?
For quite some time, no.
It's
And there are these stories about him being a bit of a wild child,
Okay.
involved in petty theft and drinking, but
But typical kind of.
yeah, there's not a lot of evidence of those more serious crimes that
Wow.
some accounts, like to attribute to him.
Okay, so not a model citizen,
No.
but not exactly the hardened criminal either.
Right.
So when does this big religious awakening happen?
What?
What triggers this transformation from like a sort of unruly youth?
Well, it seems it all really comes down
Yeah.
to a pilgrimage that he undertook around 1897.
Okay, and pilgrimages, those were pretty common in Russia at the time, right?
Oh, absolutely. Very common.
So what makes this one special? What happens?
Well, this one just appears to have been truly life-altering for Rasputin.
Okay.
He visits the St. Nicholas Monastery at Verkhoturye
Uh-huh.
and meets an elder,
Okay.
a starets, they call them,
Right, right.
named Makaturi. And this encounter really seems to have just, had this profound impact on him.
How, so, I mean, what
It's just-
changes?
It seems like everything changes.
Okay.
He returns home like a completely changed man. He embraces vegetarianism,
Oh,
dedicates himself to prayer,
okay.
and starts wandering the country.
Like a vagabond.
Well, more like a Stranic. It was
Right.
kind of a tradition in Russia, this
Right.
wandering mystics
Oh, okay.
seeking, spiritual enlightenment or performing acts of piety and that sort of thing.
Gotcha. So is that when he starts developing a following?
Exactly.
Yeah.
As he travels,
Yeah.
Rasputin really starts to gain this reputation for
Yeah.
his charisma and for his perceived ability to heal the sick. He'd hold these prayer meetings, perform blessings, and people were really just drawn to his unconventional,
Interesting.
almost ecstatic style of worship,
Wow. So we see him transitioning here
Yeah,
from this sort of troubled young man
right.
to this charismatic spiritual figure.
Exactly.
But how does he go from wandering the Siberian countryside
Right.
to the glittering palaces of St. Petersburg? I mean, that's quite a leap.
It is, and that's where his understanding of belief, really, and connection comes into play.
Okay.
Word of his healing powers and his growing following eventually reach St. Petersburg.
Right.
And, some in the Russian Orthodox Church
Uh-huh.
are impressed by his piety,
Sure.
despite his, unorthodox ways.
Right. And so this leads to...
Well, he ends up receiving a letter of recommendation
Right.
to Bishop Sergei, who was a really powerful figure in the church.
Right. So that opens some doors.
That opens a lot of doors for him.
So he's shrewd.
He's very sure.
He's able to leverage his reputation
Absolutely.
to gain access
Yes.
to the upper levels of society.
He arrives in St. Petersburg in 1903
Okay.
and quickly makes a name for himself among the aristocracy.
Oh, wow. And they just eat this up.
Oh, yeah, they're completely fascinated by him.
What is it about him?
His rough-hewn charisma, his intense spirituality,
Right.
and this air of mystery that just surrounds him,
Yeah. Yeah. So he's like a novelty almost to them.
He was a novelty.
Yeah. Okay. So it's in this milieu, this social whirl of high society
Right.
that he eventually meets
Yeah.
the Tsar and Tsarina in
Exactly.
1905.
Yeah.
But at this point, he's not yet the the figure of immense influence
No, yeah.
he will later become.
Right.
What changes that? What elevates him
Right.
to this position of almost unassailable trust with the Tsarina?
The Tsarina's desperation.
Huh.
You see, their only son, Alexei, heir to the throne, suffers from hemophilia.
A debilitating disease.
Oh, a debilitating and often fatal disease.
And there's no cure for it.
No cure at that time.
Right.
Alexandra, terrified for her son's life,
Yeah.
is willing to try anything,
Understandably.
turn to anyone
Right.
to save her son.
Okay. And that's where Rasputin comes in.
And that's where Rasputin steps in.
Because he's seen as this miracle worker.
Precisely.
Okay.
There's this incident in 1912
Okay.
where Alexei is gravely ill. Doctors fear for his life.
Okay.
Rasputin, summoned by the distraught Tsarina, prays for the boy.
Right.
And seemingly miraculously, Alexei recovers.
Wow. So a genuine miracle.
Well, there's a lot of debate about this.
Right.
Some historians suggest that it might have just been
Yeah.
a case of rest and reduced stress,
Giving his body a chance to heal.
allowing Alexei's body to heal.
Okay. So maybe he was just.
He was under immense pressure as the heir apparent,
Yeah.
so maybe that played a role. Others have proposed that maybe Rasputin,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps unknowingly,
Yeah.
used some form of suggestion or hypnosis,
Right.
which was, gaining popularity in medical circles at the time.
And there's also that theory about aspirin,
Oh, right.
right? That maybe he advised against giving Alexei aspirin,
Yeah.
which we now know can make bleeding worse in hemophilia.
Yes. Can exacerbate bleeding.
So who knows?
It's really hard to say.
We may never know.
But whatever the reason for his recovery,
Yeah.
it had a profound impact on the Tsarina.
It makes sense.
This incident just cemented her belief
Yeah.
in Rasputin's healing powers,
Right.
in his connection to God.
So he becomes her confidant, her spiritual advisor.
He becomes her rock in
Yeah.
this time of immense personal and political turmoil for her.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this one event, this seeming miracle,
Yeah.
really catapults Rasputin
Mm-hmm.
to this position of extraordinary influence.
Incredible.
But as I think we're going to see,
Yes.
this influence comes at a cost.
Absolutely.
It makes him powerful,
Yes.
but also incredibly vulnerable.
Because his power rested entirely on this perception
Of
of his
him.
piety, of his holiness.
And as his presence at court grows,
Yes.
so too does the scrutiny of his personal life.
Exactly.
And that's where things start to really unravel for Rasputin.
That's where things get interesting.
Oh, yeah.
You have to imagine the atmosphere in Russia at this time,
Set the scene for us.
World War I is raging.
Right.
The economy is in shambles.
Aye.
People are looking for someone to blame.
Uh-huh.
And Rasputin, with his peasant background and his unconventional behavior,
Right.
becomes a very, very visible target.
He's an outsider.
He is the ultimate outsider.
And so all these whispers
Yeah.
turn into accusations.
Accusations of heresy,
Yeah.
of undue influence on political matters.
And his personal life
Doesn't help.
doesn't exactly line up
No, it really does.
with the image of a pious, holy man.
That's putting it mildly.
Yeah. So what really stands out to you in all these sources
Mhm.
about his personal life? What really resonates?
The accusation of rape
Oh, wow.
by Kionia Berlatskaya, a former follower.
Okay, so that's a serious allegation.
Incredibly damaging.
And even with all these scandals swirling around him,
I know.
the Tsarina continues to defend him.
Yeah.
She doesn't waver.
Her unwavering belief in Rasputin's power to heal her son
Right.
just blinded her.
Blinded her to his flaws.
She saw any criticism of him
Wow.
as an attack on her family, on her ability to protect Alexei.
So we have this incredibly volatile situation brewing here.
Oh, absolutely.
A deeply unpopular war,
Yeah.
economic hardship,
Uh-huh.
and a growing sense that the Tsarina is being manipulated
Right.
by this controversial figure.
Yes.
So it's no wonder that people started taking more drastic measures
Exactly.
to remove Rasputin from the picture.
Well, there are at least 2 documented assassination attempts on him.
Okay.
The first, in 1914, was carried out by Kionia Guseva,
Okay.
a follower of Ilyador,
And Ilyador was.
a defrocked priest
Okay.
who had become one of Rasputin's most vocal critics.
So she stabs him,
She stabs him.
and he survives.
He survives.
But what's really striking
It
is that even after being attacked,
Yes.
he refuses to leave the capital.
He just won't back down.
He almost seems to revel in his notoriety.
There's this defiance in his actions.
Yeah.
It's almost as if he believes he's untouchable,
Wow.
divinely protected.
Right, but this defiance, this refusal to back down,
Yeah.
ultimately seals his fate.
It does.
Which brings us
To his murder.
to that infamous murder in December of 1916.
Yes.
I mean, the story is almost too incredible to believe.
It is, yeah.
Poison cakes, poison wine, multiple gunshot wounds.
Like something out of a spy novel?
Yeah, right?
Well, the most widely known account comes from Prince Felix Yusupov,
Okay.
one of the conspirators who claims to have lured Rasputin to his palace.
Under false pretenses.
Under false pretenses, yes.
And he paints this picture of Rasputin
He does.
as almost superhuman,
Oh, yeah.
consuming this poisoned food and drink with no effect.
Well, Yusupov's account is very dramatic, certainly.
It's a good story.
But the sources, especially the autopsy report,
yeah?
contradict some of his claims.
Like what?
Well, there's no evidence of poisoning, for example.
Oh, really?
And it seems Rasputin was actually killed by a single gunshot to the head.
Oh, wow.
Not quite the elaborate scene
Right.
that Yusupov describes.
Okay, so what can we actually take away from all these sources then?
Well, it seems pretty clear that a group of nobles,
Okay.
fearing for the future of the empire and just enraged by Rasputin's influence over the Tsarina,
Yeah.
decided to take matters into their own hands.
Okay.
They lure him to Yusupov's palace.
Okay.
And, well, the details are murky, but it seems they shot him and disposed of his body in the Neva River.
So his death, what's the reaction? Is there widespread mourning for this holy man?
Quite the opposite.
Really?
For many, his death was a cause for celebration.
Wow.
He had become this symbol of the rot at the heart of the Tsarist regime,
Right.
and removing him, was
Yeah.
seen as necessary.
So in a way, patriotic.
Even patriotic, yeah.
It's a fascinating paradox.
It is.
This peasant who rises to such a position of power and influence,
Yes.
only to become the embodiment of everything that people despise
Right. Or
about
no.
the ruling class.
It speaks to those deep, deep social and political divisions that were tearing Russia apart.
Yeah.
Rasputin, in many ways, becomes this lightning rod for all of that discontent.
So even in death, he can't escape the rumors and the speculation.
Well, that's right. His body is exhumed and burned.
After the Tsar abdicates, right?
Just a few months after the Tsar's abdication.
I mean, the symbolism is powerful there.
Oh, it is. Very powerful.
He's still seen as this threat.
A potential rallying point
Right.
for supporters of the old regime.
Okay, so what becomes of Rasputin's legacy? Does his family, do they share in his infamy?
That's interesting. No. Rasputin's wife and some of his children choose to just remain in their village.
Lead a quiet life.
Yeah, they lead quiet lives, far away from the political turmoil.
But one of his daughters.
But one of his daughters, Maria,
Yeah.
takes a very different path.
And her story really reflects the upheaval
Absolutely.
and the change that was sweeping through Russia during that time.
Imagine fleeing your homeland after a revolution, having to build a new life in a foreign country.
That's exactly what she does.
That's exactly what she does.
Okay.
She escapes to Paris.
Wow.
And reinvents herself as a dancer.
Really?
Even performs at the Folies Bergère.
From a Siberian peasant's daughter
You can't make this stuff up.
to a performer in one of Paris's most famous cabarets.
It's incredible.
That is quite the transformation. It is.
But her story doesn't end there, does it?
No, she eventually emigrates to the United States.
Okay.
Where she takes on yet another unexpected role.
Lay it on me.
A lion tamer in a circus.
A lion tamer. Seriously.
Yes, a lion tamer.
Wow.
And apparently she was quite good at it.
Talk about resilience and adaptability.
Right.
That's incredible.
It's remarkable.
It really speaks to, the human capacity for reinvention.
Yes.
To forge this new path.
Absolutely.
Even amidst chaos and uncertainty.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about these grand narratives and powerful figures.
But individual people.
It's about the lives of ordinary people who are caught up in these events, just
trying to get by.
Trying to make sense of it all and find their place.
In a changing world.
In a changing world.
It's remarkable how Rasputin's story, even his daughters,
it is,
really seems to embody the turbulence of that whole era.
Absolutely.
But I think what's most intriguing
about Rasputin himself is that even after all of this, even after sifting through all the facts, he remains an enigma.
It's the question that lingers, isn't it?
Yeah.
He was revered by some as a healer, as a man of God.
A holy man?
Others saw him as a dangerous fraud, a threat to society.
Right, so which was it?
Well, and that's just it.
Yes.
The sources that we looked at, offer no easy answers.
It's this duality.
It is this inherent contradiction that continues to just fascinate us, I think.
He clearly possessed a certain charisma, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
An ability to connect with people, especially the Tsarina.
Right.
On a deep emotional level.
Yes.
But he also seems to have been driven by very earthly desires.
Yeah, well, it's important to remember the context. You know, Russia at that time was a society in deep crisis.
Yeah.
There was widespread poverty, social unrest, and this growing sense that the monarchy was out of touch, completely unable to provide for its people.
Right.
And in that kind of environment, a figure like Rasputin, who seemed to represent both spiritual salvation and worldly excess, you know, could become incredibly potent, both as a source of hope and as a target for all this blame.
So he becomes this symbol of the anxieties and the contradictions of the age.
Absolutely. And you can see how he understood the psychology of belief, you know, particularly the Tsarina's, her desperate need to believe in something, someone who could offer her son a chance at survival. Her faith in him, whether it was misplaced or not, gave her a sense of control in a world that seemed increasingly chaotic.
So maybe it's not about labeling him as a saint or a sinner, but understanding him as a product of his time.
I think that's a good way to put it.
A man who, consciously or not, you know, exploited the vulnerabilities of a society that was really on the brink of collapse.
And, you know, regardless of his intentions, his actions had very real consequences. I mean, whether he was directly responsible for specific policies, it's debatable. But his presence at court undoubtedly eroded public trust in the monarchy.
He just made things worse.
He became this easy target for those who were seeking to discredit the Tsar and really just hasten the revolution.
Yeah, so it's impossible to say whether the course of Russian history would have been different if Rasputin hadn't been assassinated.
You know?
But his story, I think, serves as a cautionary tale.
I agree.
About the dangers of unchecked power.
Yes.
The perils of placing blind faith in a single individual.
Right.
And the ways in which those personal failings can have profound political repercussions.
It's a great reminder that history is rarely neat and tidy. You know, it's full of complex figures like Rasputin who defy easy categorization. They challenge us to think critically about the evidence we have, to consider multiple perspectives, and to just acknowledge the messy realities that so often shape the course of human events.
Well said. As we wrap up this deep dive today, I hope it encourages all of you out there to continue exploring this topic, to delve deeper into the sources, to question the narratives that you encounter.
Absolutely.
And to draw your own conclusions about this enigmatic figure.
It's a fascinating story.
It really is.
Was he a force for good or evil?
Right.
A holy man or a charlatan?
You decide.
Perhaps, in the end, the answer lies.
Yeah.
Not in a definitive label, but in that nuanced space between those extremes.
And maybe that's the most important lesson of all.
I think so.
History, like life, is rarely black and white. It's in those shades of gray, in the messy contradictions, that the most compelling truths often lie.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
You have to imagine the atmosphere in Russia at the time. You know, World War I is raging, the economy's in shambles, and people are looking for someone to blame.
And Rasputin, with his peasant background and his unconventional behavior, he becomes an easy target.
Oh, absolutely. He's the ultimate outsider, right? Here he is, this Siberian peasant, seemingly dictating policy to the Tsarina.
So the whispers turn to accusations.
Accusations of heresy, of undue influence on political matters. It's all swirling around him.
And, of course, his personal life doesn't exactly help matters.
No, not at all.
It really doesn't line up with the image of a pious holy man.
That's, putting it mildly, there are all these stories about his indulgences, you know?
Like what kind of things? What really stands out in these sources?
The drinking, the rumors of affairs, you know, women from all different social circles. It's all fueling the fire.
And it's really painting him as this debauched hypocrite.
Exactly. And then there's the accusation of rape by Kionia Berlatskaya, a former follower of his.
Okay, so that's a serious allegation.
Oh, incredibly damaging. It really plays into that narrative of Rasputin as a manipulator, abusing his power.
It's interesting, even with all of these scandals.
Oh, I know, right?
the Tsarina continues to defend him.
Her belief in him never wavered. Never.
Why? I mean, how could she?
Her desperation to save her son, it blinded her.
To his flaws.
To everything. She saw any criticism of him as a direct attack on her family, on her ability to protect Alexei.
Wow, so we have this incredibly volatile situation brewing here.
Oh, absolutely.
A deeply unpopular war.
Yeah.
Economic hardship. And this growing sense that the Tsarina is being completely manipulated by this controversial figure.
Right, it's a powder keg.
So it's really no wonder that people started taking more drastic measures to try and remove Rasputin from the picture.
Well, there are at least 2 documented assassination attempts on him.
Yeah.
The first one, in 1914, is carried out by Kionia Guseva, a follower of Iliador.
And Iliador, remind us who he was.
Oh, a defrocked priest, one of Rasputin's most vocal critics.
Right. Okay, so she stabs him.
She stabs him.
And he survives.
He survives somehow. And what's so striking is that even after this attack, he refuses to leave the capital.
He's not backing down.
No, he almost seems to revel in his notoriety,
Yeah.
There's this defiance in his actions, like he believes he's untouchable, divinely protected.
Wow, okay, but this defiance, this refusal to back down, it ultimately seals his fate.
It does. It leads us to that infamous night in December of 1916.
His murder.
Yes, his murder. I mean, the story is almost too incredible to believe.
Yeah, poisoned cakes, the wine, multiple gunshot wounds.
It sounds like something out of, a cheap spy novel.
Right.
Well, the most widely known account, of course, comes from Prince Felix Yusupov.
One of the conspirators.
One of the conspirators. And he claims to have lured Rasputin to his palace, under false pretenses.
And he paints this picture of Rasputin as this almost superhuman figure consuming all this poison with no effect.
Oh, it's a very dramatic story, certainly.
It makes for good reading.
But the sources, especially the autopsy report,
Yeah?
contradict some of his more sensational claims.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, there's no evidence of poisoning, for example.
No poisoning.
No, and it seems Rasputin was actually killed by a single gunshot to the head.
Not quite the elaborate scene that Yusupov lays out.
Not cool.
Okay, so sifting through all of this, what can we actually glean from the sources about what happened that night?
Well, it seems pretty clear that a group of nobles, fearing for the future of the empire and just enraged by Rasputin's influence, they decided they had to take matters into their own hands.
They were done.
They were done. They lured him to Yusupov's palace.
Okay.
And while the exact details are murky,
it seems they shot him and dumped his body in the Neva River.
It was a simple plan, really.
Brutal, but effective.
So, the reaction to his death, what was it? Was there widespread mourning? This holy man.
Quite the opposite.
Really?
For many, his death was a cause for celebration.
Wow.
He had become a symbol of the rot, the corruption at the heart of the Tsarist regime,
So removing him?
Removing him was seen as necessary, even patriotic.
It's such a fascinating paradox, though, isn't it?
It is.
This peasant who rises to such a position of power, influence,
I know.
only to become the embodiment of everything that people despise about the ruling class.
It really speaks to those deep social and political divisions that were just tearing Russia apart.
And Rasputin, in a lot of ways, he becomes this lightning rod.
He does.
For all of that discontent, for all of that anger.
And even in death, he can't escape it,
Well, that's right. I mean, his body is exhumed and burned.
Just a few months after the Tsar's abdication.
I mean, the symbolism there, it's potent. He's still seen as this threat, this potential rallying point for those who support the old ways.
Okay, so what happens to Rasputin's family? Do they share in his infamy?
Interestingly enough, no. Rasputin's wife and some of his children, they choose to remain in their village.
They want to distance themselves, just live a quiet life.
Yeah, far away from the political turmoil.
But one of his daughters, Maria
takes a very different path.
And her story really reflects the upheaval.
Absolutely.
And the change that was sweeping through Russia at the time.
It does. Imagine fleeing your homeland after a revolution, having to build a new life in a completely foreign country.
That's exactly what she did.
She escapes to Paris.
And reinvents
herself as a dancer.
A dancer.
She even performed at the Folies Bergère.
From a Siberian peasant's daughter.
Incredible, right?
To a performer.
I know.
In one of Paris's most famous cabarets.
It's truly remarkable.
That is quite a transformation.
It is.
But wait, her story doesn't end there?
No, she eventually emigrates to the United States and takes on yet another unexpected role.
Okay, hit me with it.
A lion tamer in a circus.
You're kidding me. A lion tamer.
A lion tamer. And by all accounts, she was quite good at it.
Wow, talk about resilience and adaptability.
Right. I mean, Maria's story really speaks to that human capacity for reinvention, for carving out a new path, even amidst chaos and uncertainty.
It's a good reminder that history isn't just about these grand narratives, these powerful figures.
No, it's about the lives of ordinary people caught up in these world-changing events, just trying to survive.
Trying to make sense of it all.
And find their place.
In a world that's constantly changing.
Constantly changing.
It's remarkable how Rasputin's story, even his daughters, really seems to embody the turbulence of that era.
Oh, it does.
But I think what's most intriguing about Rasputin himself is that even after this deep dive, after sifting through all the facts, he remains an enigma.
He does.
Was he a genuine holy man?
Yeah.
A manipulative charlatan?
Right.
Or something in between?
It's the question that lingers, isn't it? I mean,
it really is.
He was revered by some as a healer, a man of God.
Right.
Others saw him as this, dangerous fraud, a threat to society.
It's this duality.
It is.
This inherent contradiction.
It's contradiction.
That I think continues to fascinate us.
He clearly possessed a certain charisma, though.
Oh, he did.
An ability to connect with people.
Especially the Tsarina.
Yeah, on this deep emotional level.
But he also seems to have been driven by, very earthly desires.
Right.
Which contradicts that image of piety that he so carefully cultivated.
Well, and it's important to remember the context.
Yeah.
Russia at that time was a society in deep crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
Widespread poverty, social unrest, this growing sense that the monarchy was totally out of touch and unable to provide for its people.
They weren't listening.
No. And in that kind of environment, a figure like Rasputin, who seemed to represent both spiritual salvation and worldly excess, he could become incredibly potent, both as a source of hope and as a target for blame.
So he becomes this symbol of all the anxieties and the contradictions of that age.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, looking back at the sources, you can see how he really understood the psychology of belief.
Okay.
Particularly the Tsarina's desperate need to believe in something, someone
who could save her son.
Who could offer her son a chance at survival.
Right.
Her faith in him, whether it was misplaced or not, gave her this sense of control in a world that just felt increasingly chaotic.
So maybe it's not about labeling him as a saint or a sinner.
Right.
But understanding him as a product of his time.
A product of his time. I like that.
This man who consciously or not exploited the vulnerabilities of a society that was really on the brink of collapse.
And his actions, regardless of his intentions, had very real consequences.
That's right.
I mean, whether he was directly responsible for specific policies, it's debatable.
Sure.
But his presence at court undoubtedly further eroded public trust in the monarchy.
He just made things worse.
He became this easy target for those who were seeking to discredit the Tsar and really hasten the revolution.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to say for certain whether the course of Russian history would have been different if Rasputin hadn't been assassinated.
Right.
But his story, I think, really serves as this cautionary tale.
I agree.
About the dangers of unchecked power.
Absolutely.
The perils of placing blind faith in a single individual.
Right. And the ways in which personal failings can have these profound political repercussions.
Yeah, well said.
It's a good reminder that history is rarely neat and tidy.
Oh, no, it's messy.
It's messy. It's full of complex figures like Rasputin, who defy easy categorization.
You really do.
They challenge us to think critically about the evidence, to consider different perspectives, and to just acknowledge that, the messy realities that shape the course of human events.
As we wrap up this deep dive today, I hope it encourages all of you out there to continue exploring, to delve deeper into the sources, to question the narratives that you encounter, and to draw your own conclusions about this enigmatic figure.
It's a fascinating story.
Was Rasputin a force for good or evil?
A holy man or a charlatan?
Perhaps the answer lies not in some definitive label, but in that nuanced space between those extremes.
I think so.
History, like life itself, is rarely black and white. It's in those shades of gray, in the messy contradictions that the most compelling truths often lie.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.